the icy continent we know less about than the moon. Here, beneath kilometers of snow, lie forgotten expeditions, dead whaling towns, and phenomena science can barely explain. From ships frozen into the ice to a meteorite from Mars. Today on TopFacts, we are heading to Antarctica. Watch until the very end, and I wish everyone a pleasant viewing. Karkov Chanka. That is exactly how, in Russian, the unique model of an Antarctic all-terrain vehicle created in the 1950s in the Soviet Union was named. Based on a tractor platform and outwardly resembling a tank, this machine was engineered to work in the most extreme conditions. In 1959, 2 of these giants were delivered to Antarctica, and they managed to reach the South Pole itself. Today, one of them stands as a monument not far from the Russian Antarctic station Progress. In the 50s, the USSR, like other countries, was actively developing Antarctica, and it quickly became clear that ordinary tractors could not handle the tasks in such conditions. A machine was needed that could not only survive in the icy desert, but also provide expedition members with safe, warm, and relatively comfortable living quarters. This behemoth was exactly such a solution. Height, more than 4 meters, width, about 3.5, length, almost 8.5 meters. The cabin inside was the size of a small studio where 8 people could settle comfortably. There was a kitchen, a sleeping area, a toilet, and a separate control post for the driver and navigator. And that is not all. A dedicated workshop turned the Karkov Chanka into a mobile laboratory. In 1975, an improved version replaced the original and continues to serve to this day. In Antarctica, they found something that seemed no one should ever have seen. A ship literally torn from the icy grip and frozen within it as if in cement. We usually imagine a shipwreck somewhere on the ocean floor. But in Antarctica, everything is different. Here, ships can meet their end by becoming entombed in ice during the coldest periods of the year. If a vessel is not an icebreaker capable of smashing thick ice, it will remain a prisoner until a thaw. And sometimes, the ice simply crushes the hull. This is what happened to one of the most famous vessels in history, Endurance, on which in 1915, the legendary explorer Ernest Shackleton sailed to the shores of Antarctica. The ice squeezed the ship. It sank and lay at a depth of almost 3 kilometers for more than a century before it was found. But the mysterious ship in question here was lifted upward by a flow, as if nature itself decided to preserve it within an icy block. What happened to the crew? What is the story of this doomed voyage? Write in the comments what you think. Recently, a research icebreaking vessel made a discovery scientists call unprecedented, the largest breeding colony of fish ever recorded. At a depth of about 500 meters beneath the ice of the Weddell Sea, a section of seafloor at least 240 square kilometers in area, about 1/3 larger than Washington, District of Columbia, was found, and on it, approximately 60 million active nests. Until this moment, the most social fish species gathered for spawning in at most the hundreds, and scientists had never seen anything like this. The vessel was moving between the Antarctic Peninsula and the continent, mapping the seafloor and filming it with special equipment. In one area beneath the shelf ice, an operator noticed something unusual on the cameras: circles resembling nests. These turned out to be nests of ice fish that live only in the Southern Ocean. Interestingly, their blood is absolutely transparent and filled with antifreeze compounds that keep it from freezing in water below zero. This place is called the Pole of Inaccessibility, for good reason. It is here, at the most remote point of Antarctica, equidistant from all its shores, that in 1958, Soviet researchers arrived for the first time in history. A team of 18 people, using heavy tractors, hauled trailers with equipment and modular units to build a station. Upon reaching their goal, they began to erect a small settlement, a hut for 4 people, a radio room, 2 radio masts about 20 meters high, and a set of meteorological instruments. On the roof of the hut, they installed a plastic bust of Lenin, which was turned to face Moscow. But it quickly became clear that staying here for long was impossible. The conditions were too harsh. After only 12 days, the team left the station. A plane took 4 of them, and the rest traveled by sleds. Soviet polar explorers returned here only once, in 1967. The next expedition set foot on these snows only in 2007, and they were Britons, who reached it without any machinery, solely by their own power. Today, this house buried under snow, with its solitary bust and commemorative plaque, has become an official historical monument. Once, British sailors were an important part of the whaling industry in the Southern Hemisphere. Today, only rusty skeletons of buildings and the hulks of ships, dead and fused into the shore, remain of the once bustling stations. This is not the sort of place one would want to visit alone. Toppled steel pipes lie across the roads, half-ruined power station buildings and dormitories gape with empty openings, and their walls crumble, spilling out remains of furniture, rusty beds and bathtubs, lengths of pipe and wiring. Huge steel fat-rendering tanks, almost 10 meters in diameter, look as though someone squeezed them with a giant hand. All this is the result of decades of destructive winds and of time since the station closed. In recent years, attempts have been made to clean up the site and reinforce the buildings to make them safe for tourists. But even now, hurricanes sweeping down from the mountains of this sub-Antarctic island make everything groan and creak. Sheets of rusty iron shriek in the wind, doors slam by themselves, and the spinning ventilator cowls on the old plants whirl without stopping, just as on that day in 1965 when the workers left here forever. The winter of 1899. 10 members of an expedition decided to spend the entire season in Antarctica, settling into pre-assembled modular huts. Inside, they not only lived, but also worked. They set up a photo lab and even a taxidermy workshop, because the expedition's goal was to document the continent's nature. Each person's private space was minimal, only a bunk of one's own. In such conditions, people spent most of the winter literally without getting out of bed, because outside, an eternal chill raged. After the expedition ended, these huts stood for decades, buried in snow and ice, which inadvertently helped preserve them much longer than anyone expected. Some in whispers call them cursed. Irbidi. Well, only the restorers know the truth. The restoration work proved vast. It was necessary to reinforce walls bowed under the weight of snow and to save everything inside. 62 specialists from 12 countries worked on the project, experts in wood, metal, textiles, and paper. All 3 bases, Cape Royds, Cape Evans, and Hut Point, are on Ross Island. And today, a team continues to monitor and maintain these historic places. It was called Endless Sea. The Brazilian yacht, owned by a well-known journalist and entrepreneur, headed for the coast of Antarctica with 4 people on board. They were filming a documentary when suddenly winds of more than 100 kilometers per hour struck. The vessel was tossed straight onto the ice fields. The boat became stuck. The crew sent a distress signal that was picked up by a Chilean naval base. Reaching the site, rescuers took the people off, but the yacht itself could not be saved. Water that penetrated the hull froze immediately, tearing it apart from the inside. The vessel sank to the bottom of a shallow cove at a depth of around 6 meters, where it lay for almost a year until the owner could return and conduct a salvage operation. When the weather cooperated, inflatable buoys were attached and the yacht slowly rose to the surface, thus ended the story of the ghost from the icy waters. A new base designed to house roughly 150 service members has become a key element in ensuring the autonomy and independence of Russia's naval forces in the Arctic. The country's leadership explicitly calls this a step to strengthen Moscow's presence in the region, and judging by the result, the task has been accomplished. The complex has a modern radar center capable of tracking the movement of ships and aircraft. In addition, the runway here was recently extended to 3.3 kilometers, which allows the reception and refueling of most military aircraft, including fighters patrolling the polar sky. Experts note that the melting of Arctic ice, which is associated with climate change, is making sea routes at these latitudes more accessible and, thus, opening new opportunities for developing energy resources and minerals. Construction of the base, which received the name Arctic Trefoil, was completed in 2017. It is located only 260 kilometers east of the outermost point of Norway's Svalbard archipelago. The structure stands on piles to withstand extreme cold, and inside there is everything for autonomous living. Its own power plant, a medical station, a library, a chapel, a gym, and even a movie theater. The giant Erebus Glacier in Antarctica descends from Mount Erebus and flows into the sea, forming a 6-kilometer-long ice tongue, a long, narrow strip of ice jutting toward the bay. This icy blade with a bluish fringe reaches into the snowy waters of McMurdo Sound, and its thickness ranges from 50 meters at the tip to almost 300 where it presses against the shore. It is a living, constantly changing body, influenced by internal stresses and external forces. Ice tongues form when a glacier's flow quickly enters a sheltered body of water. In the case of Erebus, protection is provided by Cape Evans and Cape Royds, which shield it from the open waters of the Ross Sea. In summer, the sea ice around the tongue melts, and it begins to float without losing its shape. Waves gradually carve intricate patterns into its edges, and sometimes deep caves. In winter, the sea freezes again, locking the ice structure into a new armor. What are those tiny tracks that seem to grow out of the snow like fragile flowers? This rare phenomenon is called elevated tracks. It occurs in regions where dry, frosty, and windy weather persists for weeks. The secret is simple. When a person walks on loose snow, their steps compact it so much that those patches become many times harder than the surrounding surface. A strong and steady wind gradually blows away all the soft snow, while the compacted footprints remain, rising above the surface. Sometimes they can be seen even weeks after a person has passed by. For specialists, this is a signal. The area may have increased avalanche danger. It sounds like science fiction, but a wealthy entrepreneur seriously considered towing an iceberg from Antarctica to the Persian Gulf. And, astonishingly, the technologies for this already exist. There are entire companies producing equipment for so-called ice management operations. The idea is simple. A mass of ice drifting off the coast of the United Arab Emirates could become a source of drinking water. Satellites identify a suitable iceberg, sometimes up to 1.5 kilometers wide. Then a special metal belt is attached to prevent it from breaking apart en route. A journey of about 10 months should end off the coast of the Emirate of Fujairah. True, calculations show that up to 30% of its mass could be lost before arrival. The cost of the project is on the order of $200 million. If the trials succeed, icebergs really could appear in the waters of the Persian Gulf. Imagine an iceberg of almost 1,270 square kilometers in area and more than 150 meters thick. This icy giant, 20 times the area of Manhattan, calved from the Brunt ice shelf in Antarctica, nearly a decade after scientists first noticed the appearance of a huge crack. Many were quick to blame global warming, but specialists clarify that such events can also be part of the natural life cycle of ice shelves. They grow until they become too large, then break, and the process begins anew. However, even for this region, the case was unusual. A rift called the North Rift raced toward another one, 34 kilometers away, moving at an incredible speed, almost 1 kilometer per day. And then everything happened literally within a few hours. The ice plate broke off and set out on a free drift. Footage shot by scientists as part of a NASA mission studying how polar regions respond to climate change quite literally exploded across the internet. A huge iceberg with perfectly even edges and a flat surface, as if cut by a giant ruler, became the butt of jokes about aliens and colossal ice chisels. In fact, such formations, called tabular icebergs, are entirely natural. Scientists noticed them off the northern shores of Antarctica during aerial photography. The largest of them was about 1.6 kilometers long, and as with any iceberg, only 1/10 was visible above the water. The rest of its mass was hidden in the depths. The formation of a tabular iceberg can be compared to cutting off a corner from a sheet of paper with scissors. Only instead of paper, there is the edge of an ice shelf, and instead of scissors, there are waves and the forces within the ice. Immediately after calving, the edges are perfectly straight, but once in the open ocean, the iceberg quickly loses sharp lines. They are worn down in collisions with other flows or melted away. The name of this phenomenon comes from the Greek kryo, ice, and konis, dust. Mysterious dark holes on the surface of glaciers were first described by a Swedish explorer back in 1870 while traveling across the Greenland ice sheet. Cryoconite is a kind of icy well of varying size, filled with meltwater and with a layer of dark sediment at the bottom. This dust can include tiny rock particles, soot, microbes, dust blown from deserts on other continents, traces of volcanic eruptions, or emissions from power plants. The dark material absorbs solar heat, the ice beneath melts faster, and the pit gradually deepens. In summer, such holes become tiny ecosystems where cold-loving microorganisms and minute animals find a place. If you ever decide to dive in the waters off Antarctica, be careful, because there you can encounter one of the strangest and deadliest natural phenomena. It is called a Brinele, or the ice finger of death. Imagine a giant icicle, only growing downward from the sea ice rather than from a roof. It forms from oversalted water, brine, that is produced when seawater freezes and expels salt. Such brine is colder than the surrounding water and begins to sink to the sea floor, creating a swirling flow that freezes everything in its path. As soon as the finger touches the ocean bottom, it turns everything living there into icy statues, sea stars, sea urchins, and other inhabitants. Sometimes at the spot of contact, there remain so-called black lakes of death, pools of super salty and supercooled water deadly to any life. In 1984, in the Allen Hills region of Antarctica, geologists on snowmobiles found a rock that later became one of the most studied in history. Scientists determined that this meteorite is of Martian origin, formed about 4 billion years ago, and fell to Earth roughly 13,000 years ago. Inside, they discovered particles of magnetite that some researchers thought might be signs of ancient microbial life on Mars. This discovery inspired NASA to undertake new investigations of the red planet and gave a boost to the development of astrobiology. Later, most specialists concluded that the structures found do not prove the existence of life on Mars. But even without giving a final answer, this stone changed the approach to the search for extraterrestrial life and showed that cosmic collisions can carry fragments of planets across the solar system. Antarctica is not just a continent of ice. Hidden here are mysteries that astonish even the most experienced researchers, from forgotten expeditions and enigmatic natural phenomena to discoveries capable of changing our understanding of the universe. If you enjoyed this video, I would be glad if you wrote any comments for support, and right now, please watch our next video, which has appeared on your screen.